I am cursed. Every video I make lately immediately becomes outdated. My tutorial, where I talk about how resonance hardly matters. Not a week later, ESGOO, where resonance matters. My video on base IDs, where I talk about how there's dissonance story-wise, since the identity is what is used in battle, not the base ID, so it's less satisfying narratively. If you've played Canto 5, you know why that is wrong. In my most recent video, the ESGOO tier list, which I specifically posted as soon as I could after the Battle Pass ESGOO, thinking there would be a big nice gap, was made outdated less than 48 hours later. But what if I could use this curse to bring something back? Something forgotten. Well, it's worth a try. Anyways, that was dramatic. I mean, come on, this is a silly little gacha game that I should realistically not be this invested in for the sake of my mental well-being, and I am most certainly not being cursed by some higher power, and I am very, very sane. Speaking of reality checks, Burn is not very good as a damaging status. Now, stop typing angry comments. I know that sounds like a conclusion already, but I'm going to fully inform you why I think Burn has some fundamental issues, but also the upsides, and why it is mostly being held back by a lack of IDs and proper support. So for now, I want to talk about all the Burn IDs in the game, and by all, I mean only these 5 IDs. Yes, somehow in Limbus's roster of 70 plus IDs, this is all we have. Now, what Burn lacks in IDs, it does make up for in ESGOO, and I plan to talk about all of them to varying degrees, but before that, I want to make it clear that I will be mostly looking at them from the perspective of applying and using Burn. I will talk about their viability as ESGOOs and IDs individually a bit, but the Burn is what we care most about here. And when it comes to Burn, there is one main group of IDs that comes to mind, because they are the only group that could come to mind that inflicts Burn, and that's the Liu IDs. Gregor, Merceau, Honglu, and Ishmael. I'll go through these in release order, also known as the order I said them in, and I'll mention any relevant ESGOO they have during their segment. Liu Gregor is an ID that is hardly talked about anymore. At least I don't see anybody talking about him. Perhaps due to being outshined in a lot of ways nowadays, but Uptype 4 did a lot to help Liu Gregor's abysmal numbers become less abysmal. Looking at his skills, he has high damage potential due to his high coin amounts, but it also becomes very clear Gregor is incredibly reliant on having the opponent be burning. Without any coin power conditions, his rolls are still pretty bad. 8, 11, and 12, which is better than the 8, 8, 12 he is at Uptype 3. However, with just a little bit of burn, he goes up to 10, 14, and 12, with that skill 2 certainly being the biggest improvement. And in terms of burn potency, Liu Gregor, in base, is actually the best ID we have, full stop. 4 on his skill 1, 5 on his skill 2, accounting for his passive, and 8 on the skill 3. This means that, with a little bit of count, Gregor can very easily get to his low burn potency conditions and start rolling better. The only slight issue is Gregor's complete lack of count. However, unlike something like Rupture or Sinking, Burn does not need more than +1 count a turn to stay going, which is definitely Burn's biggest strength. Since it will always only consume 1 count at the end of the turn, adding fuel to the fire is easy enough, and maintaining it is too. So a Burn ID with no count really is not a death sentence, unlike how it can be with Rupture, Sinking, or Bleed. Back to Liu Gregor though, he does gain some attack power up and extra damage on his skill 2 and 3 respectively, which is neat and helps supplement his already pretty good damage, and he does have interesting synergy with Liu Merceau's support passive. Due to Gregor having lots of individual instances of burn application, this would get boosted each time, but this passive is pretty random, so it is by no means a sure thing. Overall, this ID is not very complicated, but that's about expected from launch IDs. He gets the job done well enough though. The biggest annoyance for Liu Gregor for me is, despite being one of the 2 sinners in the game that had a burn ID on launch, he still lacks a proper burn ego. And I say proper with such obvious disdain because, actually, you can use Suddenly one day and get the 1 in 5 chance to get 10 burn. And while yes, that is correct, an ego that only does something 20% of the time is not an ego that works for a team. So I am disregarding it, and you should too. But overall, Liu Gregor is an ID that strangely holds up pretty well due to having solid damage, but his clashing is the main thing holding him back. But on a burn team, he's actually very good. Moving on from Gregor, we have Merceau, who takes a pretty different approach from Gregor when it comes to burn. While Gregor focuses on single target burn, Merceau sacrifices a little bit of focus potency for spreading burn to multiple enemies. This is present on the skill 2 and 3, and is the only instance of it on an ID, sadly, which is a real shame. I don't know why, considering it is on some ego. However, more relevant is Liu Merceau's underwhelming numbers. 11, 11, and 14, though admittedly it's easy to make that 14 a 17 with 5+ burn. This does mean that for 5/6 of his kit, Liu Merceau is clashing as well as N. Faust's skill 1, which is not a compliment. However, the skill 3 is pretty good. With a decent amount of potency and 3 burn count, Liu Merceau does add some sustain to the burn stack, which is neat. Then his passive, which seems to encourage Merceau to get hit despite only having a decent amount of health and a completely average guard skill. His defense level is only +1 as well, so he straight up just does not feel like he should be a tank, yet he gets trapped in the Merceau stereotype of being a tank. His support passive, as I mentioned, would actually be pretty nice if it didn't feel like you had to run a Merceau in a burn team. And by a Merceau, I really do mean any Merceau. Liu Boy here really does the best of his IDs for burn, simply by virtue of applying any amount of it, but the real star of the show here is not the ID, but the ego. Capote. This ego is the... Hey, I was fading that in. What's your... Oh, I see the problem. God, you corrosions. Anyways, this ego is pretty much the burn ego, applying 10 on hit, spreading burn around, and giving tremor based on burn. Not burn count like it says, because this game is awful. Then bursting that tremor and giving burn count to all enemies if the burst staggered an enemy. This is your easiest access to spreading burn count, since the tremor applied can actually get pretty high, so the burst is actually meaningful. And if you're not satisfied, simply hold down the funny ego button and condemn 3 slot weights worth of enemies to be brutally gored, which, fun fact, is well above the legal limit of people that can be gored at one time. This ego alone does lend some viability to burn spreading, and its cheap cost on Awakening helps with that. To Liu Merceau's credit, and a good reason to run him, is Capote does need Sloth, and he perfectly fuels it, but he's also the most consistent provider of Sloth out of our 5 IDs. But really, I feel like replacing him with Middle Merceau is almost optimal, just to have a better Merceau ID that still provides Sloth resources, but that's certainly a matter of opinion. What is not a matter of opinion is that Liu Honglu is the god of burn count. It's practically his only talking point, since his burn potency is, for lack of a better term, complete garbage. He has 4 burn potency across his kit, and while he does inflict lots of count, there's only 2 things that really matters for. 1, his own coin power conditionals, and 2, Liu Ishmael's passive and skill 3 conditional. While this is nice, and the coin power conditions really fix his skill 2, there is no reason to run Liu Honglu. Now, that sounds harsh, but this support passive is really good. It applies +1 burn count anytime burn is applied by the ally with the most SP. Now, most times this is random, but you really just need this hit on Gregor or Ishmael when they use their skill 3s, or in Gregor's case, even his skill 1, and your burn count is pretty much completely set up. Going back to what I said before, anything beyond +2 burn count a turn is not really needed, just due to the nature of how the debuff works. Now, while this is great utility, it basically forgoes the need to field him ever. Now, you can run him, but truthfully, he's a pretty ID on his own. His damage is not particularly good, his rolls are very bad, especially if you do not get the coin power conditional on the skill 2. It rolls a 10, which is really, really bad. I wish I could say him bringing Gloom to the team was a particularly unique benefit for burn teams, but no dice there. Perhaps there is something I'm missing about Liu Honglu that makes him particularly good to run in some circumstance, but I have my doubts. At least he has a use via his support passive, but it also doesn't help that he has no burn ego to help justify his usage. But if there's one Liu ID that needs no justification, it is Liu Ishmael. This is our most recent burn ID from the beginning of July, meaning it has been a little over 5 months since our last burn ID, and fun fact, the Liu Association has never gotten its own banner, as in a 3-star and a 2-star, though the Shi Association is in the same boat, just they haven't gotten any IDs. Liu Ishmael was a good stopping point for the Liu IDs though, being an incredibly strong unit with our first implementation of plus coin boost, as well as a ton of coin power, making her able to reach comical numbers on her skill 1 and especially the skill 2. Her burn count application is enough to almost entirely sustain burn, so long as enough is already going with her skill 2, and I mean, needless to say, Liu Ishmael is one of your main damage powerhouses on a burn team, but her burn potency is where she does end up falling short, with her kit only having 6 total across all her skills, with an even 2 potency per skill. Thankfully, Ishmael has one specific ego to supplement that entirely, which is Ardor Blossom Star. Not only is this a burn ego that does a ton of damage and is perfectly fueled by Liu Ishmael and spreads burn on its own, the passive also fixes her somewhat lacking burn potency for the rest of the fight. It makes her inflict 1 burn on 3 random enemies on hit if the target already had burn, which is not a hard condition. There's also Capote, since I guess orange hair correlates to needing 2 burn ego. Capote is fine to use once for the passive, but its effects are just alright really. And the resources are relatively contested for, with Wrath and Lust being on practically every burn ego, and Sloth being kind of reserved for Merceau Capote, which is the much superior Capote. It still helps to supplement even more damage for Liu Ishmael, who is already dealing plenty of that on her own. It's kind of funny. I can recommend running a burn team simply on the basis of Liu Ishmael at full power is really fun. She's one of my favorite IDs in the game to play, especially trying to line up her skill 3 to stagger the enemy at the right time, even if it is incredibly frustrating. I really hope we see more IDs along the same lines as Liu Ishmael, with lots of coins and some kind of extra coin power through plus coin boost or burn conditions, since it kinda seems to be the gimmick of the Liu IDs especially. Lots of groups of IDs gain coin power from their status, but it feels most prevalent on the Liu IDs since their status is the easiest one to maintain. And while I hope the next Liu 2-star has better base rolls than Liu Gregor, Merceau, and Honglu, low bar, I know, I would not mind it as much because burn is so easy to maintain, while still being relatively fun to engage with. So even though that was all of the Liu IDs, there is one outlier burn ID that is not a Liu ID, that we still need to cover. And it's Enclair, to no one's surprise. It's funny how little I've actually talked about Enclair on this channel, considering just how infamous and famous this ID is, and I never thought the first time I would talk about him properly would be in a burn video of all places, but in terms of kit, I mean, he's Enclair. He's got the stupidly high damage, and if you don't know why he is so strong, this skill has a base power of 30 and has 3 coins. Before you ask, I do not know why. Anyways, moving on to his burn, it is surprisingly pretty good. 3 on his skill 1, up to 6 burn and 1 burn count on the skill 2, and if you can somehow get 5 plus bleed onto the enemy, you can convert it into 7 burn with the skill 3, which is a net of 2 more damage in theory. However, in the context of burn, what really elevates him are both of his burn ego, and yes, he has 2, I don't know why either, but he has Lifetime Stew and 9-2. Lifetime Stew, despite its many shortcomings, and it has many shortcomings, does inflict 7 burn to enemies on tails hit. Also to your allies due to its gimmick, but let's assume things go well for once in your life and it hits the enemies. 7 burn is a good amount, but the passive is what carries it, potentially netting you 2, 4, or 3 more burn on each of Enclair's skills, which is a sizable increase, especially for that skill 2, making it one of the best skills in the game for potency application. The real shame is, assuming you want to be completely loyal to running burn IDs only, you have no gluttony to ever fuel this with. So it's kind of weird that they made this burn ego that costs gluttony, but hey, at least it's only 1. It'd be weird if it was like 3 or 4, but 1 is manageable. Now, 9-2 Sinclair actually does not do anything too special in terms of burn potency. Only 4 if the opponent is already burning, but a respectable enough 8 potency if they have no burn beforehand. More importantly, this can give you an attack power and defense power down on the opponent if they have just 10 burn potency, which should be almost guaranteed, And though this does not help burn itself, it is basically an adjacent bonus that comes as a result of burn being so easy to keep up. Outside of the ego itself, and even burn really, I want to talk about this passive. On heads hit with a Lust Affinity skill, lower this unit and the target's SP by 4. This is what I like to call the N-clarifying effect, and it happened with Branch of Knowledge too, but it seems like PM is putting their eggs in the N-Clair basket by making ego passives that actively sabotage plus coin Sinclairs if they use them. Thankfully, Talisman Sinclair is the only plus coin Sinclair with a Lust skill right now. This ego would likely see no use if we ever got a Philip Sinclair or a Liu Sinclair, since ruining your sanity is just bad. Again, unrelated to burn, but I wanted to talk about it anyways. Either way, Sinclair, on top of already having one of the strongest IDs in the game that already applies a good amount of burn, has 2 very good burn ego. That is it for the 5 burn IDs and their 5 ego, but somehow we actually have 6 more burn ego that have no burn ID associated with them. So let me quickly talk about them in sinner order, starting with Yi Sang and his 4th match flame, which is an unfortunate one. Though the burn potency here is high if you hit heads, and 5 AoE spreading of 10 burn is certainly neat, there is no getting around 2 very big downsides. Number 1, the cost. 5 Wrath is way too much, like seriously, what the hell were they thinking? A Gluttony is again not really possible if running full burn, and the Sloth just makes this overpriced, considering 2, the max roll of 20. Which absolutely makes this ego awful to fire off when you hit the 25% chance for tails when rolling to actually attack with it. 50 burn overall, theoretically, is nice, and Spice Bush Yi Sang will make this do plus 30% more damage and provide those gluttony resources, but 4th match Yi Sang is still just very sad. Faust is next with her 9-2 ego, which is somewhat infamous already for its frankly comical cost of 3 gluttony, 1 lust, and 1 pride. I am hopeful that this completely strange set of sin affinities on a burn ego means we are getting a Liu Faust or some kind of burn ID with gluttony soon, but it is certainly not guaranteed. The main things here are the passive and the conversion of burn. The passive is just good, and if we get a Liu Faust with a 4-coin lust skill, this would actually be quite potent. As it is now, this is best suited for N-Faust, but only just barely. Now, converting burn into defense level down is interesting, and I'll be coming back to it at the end, but for now, let's talk about Dawn's Lifetime Stew, which it has good burn count spreading and only costs lust, which is generated more than it's spent generally, so if you really need burn count for some reason, this is a good option in combination with Sanct Dawn, who also synergizes nicely with the 9-2 egos due to her lust skill 1 and 2 lust ego on demand. Ryoshu is certainly the most egregious case of lacking a burn ID, due to both her base ego and the final ego of the first season's battle pass being burn. Like, seriously, how has this not happened yet? Force for the Flames just has a decent amount of potency, especially for the cost and the additional fragile, making it actually a pretty solid, cheap option for burn teams, but 4th match Flame is actually just a really good burn ego. This gains 2 power against targets that have burn, can deal up to 100% more damage to targets that have 20 plus burn, and inflicts 4 burn. Also, since I neglected to mention this in my ego tier list video, the corrosion leads to Ryoshu getting 9 attack power up guaranteed, as well as some self-burn if it does not kill, which could synergize well if we get a self-burn Ryoshu ID in the future, but I have my doubts and my qualms with that. The passive is actually one of the biggest things about this ego that makes it so good, at least in my opinion, especially with multiple skill slots. Plus 4 final power and 4 burn for every 4th skill is a lot of burn on multi-coin skills, and means that Chef Ryoshu or Warp Ryoshu are your best options for using this ego. Though Warp Ryoshu has 1 more coin overall and fills in the lack of pride on a burn team, so she is almost objectively the better option unless you want the extra wrath that Chef Ryoshu provides. Ryoshu 4th match Flame is one of my personal favorite ego lately, and I am very sad that we have no ID to bring out its full potential with yet. And the last of the burn ego, Rodian's 4th match Flame. Frankly, I am running out of ways to say this applies a decent amount of potency, so you can see it on screen. But for a burn team, what we care about most is certainly that 3 Wrath fragility. Out of the 5 burn IDs we have now, Gregor makes the least use out of this, but the other 3 have good enough skills, and then Enclair has one of the best skills in the entire game because he is Enclair. It's just a shame Rodian has no good IDs with a Wrath skill to be able to capitalize on this. That's everything Burn has. 5 IDs and a very impressive 11.5 ego. Safe to say, no other status archetype has this spread of IDs to ego, Heck, Bleed has the opposite problem entirely, and most of the others are relatively balanced, and personally, I hate this. I do not know if it was intended to be this way or just so happened to end up this way, but I personally do not use ego much. And usually you are never utilizing this many ego on a team, especially when a few of these egos stand heads and shoulders above the rest. They make the other options less viable simply by sapping the same resources. The real reason why most of these burn ego don't excite me very much is the crux of why this video is named what it is. Burn is capped at 99 damage per turn. Now let me elaborate further. Other statuses, like Bleed, Rupture, and Sinking, only need more count and more potency to be more viable, since they can be triggered as many times as there are enemy coins to roll or your own coins. Burn currently can only trigger one time a turn, meaning as a damaging status, its ceiling is leagues behind the others. 99 burn potency and 99 count on an enemy is still 99 damage at the end of the turn. 99 Rupture and 99 Rupture count, theoretically, running a full 7 association team all using just their skill 1s, is 693 damage. And while that is certainly an extreme, it is true. Now, as I mentioned, Burn's strength comes from how easy it is to maintain, and therefore it can be used better as a resource for coin power on stuff like Liu Ishmael and Liu Gregor, who rely on the burn stack being high, but when I call burn bad, I do mean as a source of damage. The coin power indirectly increases damage as a result of burn being on the opponent, which is neat and all, and may be the direction PM chooses to take burn, but I don't want them to just do that. The great thing is that you can get up to the 99 burn cap quickly. Capote and Ardor Blossomstar alone carry burn to have insanely high potency generation, but Sinking and Rupture and Bleed just have more damage potential. And all three of them already deal better damage than burn does per turn, with Bleed having the most variance. And that's why more ego that just add burn to the stack don't really matter. 9-2 Faust is a good example of where I think burn is going or could go. Sacrificing 20 burn potency barely means anything if you are running a proper burn setup, and 10 defense level down will lead to way more damage, assuming Faust is fastest or one of the fastest on the team. It is a shame that the most optimal way to squeeze damage out of burn is literally getting rid of it, but that is how it is. And honestly, this kind of philosophy would not work with any other status besides burn, since deleting 20 Sinking, Bleed, or Rupture means you potentially sacrifice tons of compounding damage. So this is not the worst design philosophy to follow. Ultimately, what I'm saying is burn, as a source of damage, is bad, and that sucks. It's difficult to be so harsh on burn since I really do like it, and I hope the effort I put into this video shows that. It was my favorite status in Runa, and single point stab is my favorite Runa deck build. It's also just kicking it while it's down. But I am hopeful burn could actually get something that fixes its problems somehow. I don't love the idea of a burn burst or a burn deluge, but they are the most straightforward solutions. But what we really need is just more IDs. And I'm hoping that by some cosmic logic, this video gets us there. I do have several ideas on how to fix burn, like burn discard, where at certain burn potencies, they will literally burn a skill in your deck, or ways to spread burn more reliably. There's lots of ways you could implement that, but I really do think the easiest thing to do is to just uncap burn, or make its cap way higher. And potentially make it be able to double itself by spending X amount of burn count, then reduce burn count back to 1 or 2 or something. But I want Project Moon to surprise us all in how they make burn more viable. And I know theory crafting will only end up with me being more disappointed by the result, so I pass it on to you all, the viewers, to further theorize on ways to make burn as a damaging status good, and not just a copy-paste of Tremor Burst and Sinking Deluge, because as it stands currently, as much as I love it in theory, it really is in a sad, sad state. That's all from me. Thank you for watching, as always. This video took a lot more effort than I thought it would, so I really appreciate it. This video